Reclining chair. Just line myself up with it. Just resting for a moment in the chair forwards, if that's a position that doesn't instantly strain your back. Even if it does, just try and think about why that might be. You know, we do tend to hold our backs very tight. We hold ourselves up there, but even without the back of the chair, can you get a sense of sinking into the chair, just tilting forward slightly so that you feel that your feet are part of the support? So once again, just considering what it's like to sit and to feel supported, so that there is less temptation to sort of hold yourself in a particular position. Those tendencies aren't just going to magically disappear, of course, but it's worth just reminding ourselves that there is that possibility, as I sort of something that we're moving towards. The sort of state, the quality, if you like, of the posture in both mind and body, for me, is encapsulated in this term of central equilibrium. Zhongding is the Chinese term. And for me, the symbol of the mountain, I think, is a really nice symbol of that. And you could argue that everything that we do is about trying to find ways to maintain, or if not, return to this quality through the different movements, and some of which are quite complex and so on and so forth, and ultimately, in our lives. So it's worth just considering, oh, this is the aspiration, this is what I want to come back to. But now just rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Shoulder, your arm. On the other side. The upper part of your chest. Your belly. And your legs. So an important element in this cultivation of central equilibrium is always going to be being able to allow yourself to let go. It's a terrible phrase, really. I think let go. It doesn't. It doesn't give us a sense of the depth of it or the difficulty of it. But it starts really with our awareness of the pull of gravity through our body and how we're responding to that, in the sense that the habitual response always seems to be to resist it, to actively resist it, rather than to acknowledge it and to find a way for it to let it pass through the body in the first instance. Now, as you lay back like this, you can feel your weight dropping into the chair, and if you can just release in those areas in contact with the chair, by releasing, and I've used this image before, you have a really tightly clenched fist. It's very uncomfortable on the hand, the wrist, the arm. If you can open the fist a little bit so you can get a finger down the middle, you still have the structure, and this is important, but you no longer have the same kind of stress in your arm and hand. What you haven't done is just collapsed. So we've allowed structure to soften, but we've maintained the structure. But it's the softening, the releasing that is quite difficult and has to come first, really. Sort of. You do a little bit of softening, you realize the structure, you can soften some more. So you realize that if you can get that feeling of releasing in the points of contact with the chair, you feel heavier, you're more aware of the chair, and other areas of your body will begin to release. But it's like sinking into water. The further you sink into water, the greater you get the feeling of a push up. So it's not that there's no resistance, because eventually when you're upright, there will be a response from the lower part of your body. It reaches a point of compression when it will just automatically start to push up. But it's about the nature of that compression. It's like water pushing you up, not a kind of stiffening, not a tightening. So again, very closely related to this concept of central equilibrium is the term sung, which covers releasing, softening, letting go, relaxing, and so on and so forth. So these are just various elements, and I'm using the Chinese images and the Chinese terms to give you a context for it. So we'll come back to the upright position. One of the images I've often used with you all is of a tent. You could equally well say, if you're familiar with architectural stuff, a geodesic dome, where rather than say with a standard house or maybe a skyscraper, there's a lot of emphasis on a kind of linear structure, and so a very clear kind of hierarchy that you wouldn't expect the structure at the top of a skyscraper to have that much involvement with supporting the weight of the skyscraper, for instance. I know this is, I'm not an architect, but whereas in a tent or a geodesic dome, all parts are engaged to one level or another. And that allows a certain suppleness. So the kind of feeling that you're looking for from your feet, your legs, hips, buttocks, the areas where your weight is sinking into, is the kind of resistance that you would look for if, say, for instance, you were standing on a trampoline, or again, sinking down into the water. Quite strong, but not hard, not stiff, not solid in that sense. And when you consider that we're something like 3/4 water, then maybe that's not quite so far-fetched. So this gives us the two-way movement, downward with the yield into the pull of gravity, upward with that supple push up that comes as a result of the push down. The skeleton is there as well, bones supporting the areas around the bones, those tissues there. So we start to feel supported in the same way as if you go to the swimming pool, you go into the water, you relax into the water, and you realise the water is actually supporting you. But in this case, a lot of that support will come from within, not from outside. The chair is obviously supporting you. The ground is supporting you. And turning your head. And then your shoulders, hands in front of your shoulders, circling your elbows back. and then going forwards. Your arms hang down by your sides, elbows out slightly, and just rotating your arm. So although your elbows are out, shoulders are quite relaxed. And then winding around. And back the other way. Rest your hand. As we start to move the weight, we perhaps become a little bit more aware of that supple, springy quality that pushes us back up. You're tilting your pelvis, the weight's going forward, and try and soften in your knees and your ankles. Try not to tense up any of the big muscles of your legs. And you feel as though your legs fill up and there's a pressure there that then starts to push you back. What I don't want to do is to get to a point where I'm here and I can go, now I'm straining, my calf muscles are tensing up. So I want to recognize when I'm approaching that point and to allow myself to go back. Same thing when I go back into my hips. So lower back, hips, buttocks form the second spring. Or actually, it's probably better to think of it as part of the first spring. At the same time, when I come to the upright position, the weight of my head and the weight of my upper body sort of flow down. And you can think of the spine being slightly compressed and then expanding. And that's the second springy mechanism within the body. So hips push down a little bit, feet push down a little bit alternately, and the body is moved. As long as we're in a good posture. So one of the things to avoid with this, again, I'll show you from the side, is that when you go back like this. The problem here is that we can't actually now, if I push with my hips now, I'm going that way. So getting from here to here is quite tricky. There are ways we can do it, and when we come to scooping the sea, the exercise scooping the sea, looking at the sky, I'll point this out to you, but it's really quite difficult. So try and avoid that if you can. Turn slightly, go towards one leg, and again, feel that leg filling up. We often refer to the part of the body that is taking the majority of the weight as the full part. Everywhere else will be regarded as empty. Shouldn't see those as absolute terms. And then the other side. And I'm moving in your pelvis and hips, drawing your head and shoulders around in a smallish circle, a circle that mostly will fit inside the area with your feet and your hips at the corner, which is roughly square. So one of the things that helps us maintain this quality of elasticity, of springiness within the body, is being aware of how far it is possible to take that quality in terms of movement. Go back the other way. And we can increase that gradually, by sinking your hips and by conditioning your body. We can go a little bit further, perhaps. That should never be the starting point. And then stepping out and forward. Taking time to establish the step with that little sense of a push into the floor. Described it the other week. It's called planting. And if you plant a bulb, you're pushing very gently. It's not a hard push. On the other side, it just gives you that greater sense of what's beneath your foot. And it also requires that the foot itself that loses some of the tightness, some of the tension. That's quite tricky. We often, for instance, hold our toes very still. And then do a few steps alternating from side to side. And what you'll find is here, most of my weight is on this side because this foot's up in the air. I place that foot down. There's a slight shift, and then I push the other foot out. You don't have to tell the body to do that. It will do it quite not automatically. What you might want to do is to observe how it's happening and just ask yourself, is this a good way? Though, which elements of what's going on here are actually useful to me? Which would I rather? So if it's just a sort of simple shift across, that's fine. You can just, oh yeah, I can use my power. But if you're somehow tensing in your shoulders, like, no, I don't want to do this. And you start to alter the way that you move. So, in a way, that's it. I mean, in terms of basic principle, everything will fit in to what we've just done to a greater or lesser degree. There might be emphasis on one thing or another, but it's not. It's all going to be a way of expressing and cultivating, improving, building those principles in our body. So the degree to which you can do that is going to be related in part to the degree to which you're familiar with an exercise. Although I think as we do these arts for longer and longer, you will find that you can fairly quickly, with some movements at least, get a sense of what's going on beneath the surface of the patterning. And your hands drop down to your side. Bird folds its wings, weight moving, arms rotate. Then we're going to change to fisherman castanet from the forward position. Arms being pulled forward by your shoulders and then just swinging through as your weight arrives in the leg and your weight goes back. Again, arms are pulled and then swing through. Ooh, excuse me, you wait. And then rolling the ball. I'm going to pull on your arms rather than the lift. And then position spreads its way. Your elbows go out, but your hands stay in front of your hips. Push and wave. That quality of central equilibrium will get lost almost certainly. Maybe you overextend your arms a little bit, go back a little bit too far, you strain a bit as you come up. Maybe you just lose the focus for your attention, because that's an important aspect of that quality. So when I say that Tai Chi sort of explores the possibilities of this, perhaps it's more accurate to say that we explore how we're able to be active. After all, mountains don't actually move around very much, do they? And we still retain the possibility of finding central equilibrium. And I think I've talked before about these moments of punctuation. I used to call them pauses. Here, like I put a comma in a sentence. Here, where another one goes in. Just little moments where there is a very distinctive feel of stillness, or at least there is an urge to dash on into the next movement. And I think the transfer of the weight and the point of change between the weight going into an area and the weight leaving that area. So the point where an area of the body is filling up in the way that I described before, and then changing that pivot point. That's when we can also have the space in our minds to just very quickly check our physical posture. So, have you come up here and have you now tensed up, for instance? Hands loosely fisted. This time, open hands, winding out, oil in your arms. Everybody in the class and whoever's watching, if you're quite experienced in these arts, in some ways you're at a disadvantage, because you could be sitting there doing this. It's like we do every class you come to, we do this, and you're sitting there, and maybe you're planning what you're going to get at the shops later, or thinking about what happened yesterday, and so on and so forth. It's almost like we get kind of dulled, hypnotized by the regularity, the repetition. Changing to polishing the table. You may just drift off through an association with the name of the movie. And again, when we come back to here, it's an opportunity to refocus. One more time. We make the change to the vertical movements. Turning your hands palm up as though they're holding the ball, sinking into our hips, sinking into our feet, feeling the push up, lengthening through our back. Here we really feel that springiness in our back working forwards. One of the lovely things about this and the other exercises that come after this, because mostly we're not moving our weight. There's a couple where we are, but most of them we don't. We gradually get this sense of opening upwards and outwards through our upper body without the strain that we might associate with that. Next time, change into the wild goose. And part in the clouds. Here we do go forwards just enough to let our hands pass in front of our knees, but now we sit back into our hips before we push up. So with your arms up in the air like this, it's quite difficult to really kind of like think of something like central equilibrium, but we do still have that opportunity as our hands come down. We're not totally reliant on an exact posture because we're looking for it both in the forward and the rear position. Now, dragon plucks the stars from the sky. But we can begin to find a positioning for our arms and our hands that reduces the amount of strain on shoulder and on the arm when it's in one of these upward positions or outer positions. So paying attention is important, the ability to focus our attention through the movement that we're doing at the point where we're doing it. One more time. Now both hands together. Expand in. And again, here, in that inner position, good opportunity to just remind yourself of these qualities, Zhongding, the alignment of your body, sense of spaciousness within your body, quietness of the mind. Around. And then scooping the sea and looking at the sky. Now, as I said earlier, there's the possibility, and it's not necessary, but the possibility that with scooping the sea, we could go back further. But when I get to here, if I'm feeling up to this, and be careful of your back, I can go back a little bit further there. But with the leg out, that counterbalances that movement. And it opens up this whole area here. Like there's an elastic band there. And what's going to bring me back to the upright and then down is this opening here, which you wouldn't get the same if the leg was in. You won't feel it the same on this other leg. And as that contracts, it starts to draw you forwards. So what I'm not doing, or trying not to do, is to get there and kind of go, right, now I've got to heave myself up. So it's a slightly unusual posture in the sense that it uses the position of the body away from that upright position, potentially in both directions, to increase the sense of elasticity in one part of the body, we then use, bring us back to the upright and possibly beyond. Going forwards isn't so much, there is support still from this leg. You're not going out there somewhere. And then grasping the tiger's ears. And for both of these movements, a really key part here as you come back is your hips dropping back. In both instances, you're going from very big extension. Be careful of your back here. And it's like somebody sitting behind your chair, just grabbed hold of the top of your trousers, thinking you're going to fall out the chair. And you get here, and then you feel pulled back. You actually get pulled back into the chair with your hips yielding to the pull of gravity. Change to the other side. This is a useful thing to focus on because we make a great deal of use of it when we're standing. It's the yielding of the hips to gravity that is really one of the key elements in rooting down and remaining stable when we're standing. Now, obviously, when we're standing, there's the added difficulty that if you feel a bit wobbly, it's going to be more difficult. Even if you don't, it's going to be more difficult. So with the support from the chair here, it's possible to investigate that action a little bit more. And then grasping the tiger's ears. So these are tricky positions. And again, it's really challenging our ability to maintain and to continue to cultivate that quality of central equilibrium. It's possible, and we can get glimpses of it, but more importantly, perhaps, is the willingness to say, here, I can find central equilibrium, and then I can move out of it and go back to it. One more time. So come back to the original position. Part the wild horse's mane. The challenge here is actually a little different. It's quite demanding physically, but not as much as the previous two, but the complexity of it. So it's very easy to lose that stillness of the mind. Bring your weight back into your right hip, hold the ball, your right hand above the left. So forward into your left leg, feel yourself sinking into that left leg as you turn and feed your hand out. Now you come back. Be aware of the stages, hold the ball, move across. Because one of the ways that we avoid that kind of quickening of our thoughts and the loss of that clarity, that stillness in our thoughts, is because we go, oh, hold on, I'm not sure what comes next. Don't be. Focus on the movement that you're on, and you may or may not get it right next time. You may record the next movement, but at least if you're thinking, not sure what he does after this, don't start trying to do it. Get to this point, and you can watch what I'm doing, and then, oh, he does that. You're in a position to observe. Whereas if you're sort of, oh, I don't know what comes next, I wonder if this is going to happen or whatever. It's like sort of like trying to listen to somebody with earplugs in. Next time we're going to bring our feet into the movement more obviously. You step through, step out a little bit, remember planting the foot down, then you go forward. Notice that this does make a slight difference to the feeling of the movement in the upper part of your body too. Bring the foot in, start the exercise we did earlier, plant that foot down, draw the other one in, and step. Parting the wild horse's mane, stepping. When we take the step, I've sometimes said that, if I do a movement by numbers, so we can be aware of the different stages of each movement, the positions and so on. When we start to flow, the edges of those movements overlap slightly. So the count, numbering is an expediency. One of the few movements that rarely, if ever, overlaps with anything is going to be your step. The step is firmly planted before you commit your weight. I sometimes say to people when we're standing, it's as though you're walking on thin ice. And if you think about it, if there's a puddle in front of you and you put your foot there, you press in, you're not sure. You don't want to be stuck here and kind of like, have your weight plunge the foot into the cold puddle. But encourages this slowing down of our attention. One more time. And then rubbing your hands together, tapping over your face, over your head and neck, down to one shoulder, your arm, the other side, upper part of the chest, belly, and legs. Hands just resting, pushing your heels up, get a bit of feeling back into your legs. and then circling around. And back the other way. Standing. So when we come to the standing, and I'm going to move my chair as always. If you want to use the chair for a bit of extra support, that's fine. Because two challenges, I think, when we're standing. One is, of course, there's an increased possibility of sort of stumbling, losing. It's going to be more demanding of you in various ways. For obvious reasons, it's going to be more difficult to get that sense of softening. We're so accustomed to tensing up, and so both of those things are challenges that make the accessing of central equilibrium much more difficult, I think. Not impossible by any means. So it was always starting with just an awareness. How are you standing? Can you detect any of those qualities of central equilibrium, of Sung, however you think about it, in the standing that you originally identified in the sitting? Can you, for instance, feel that the front of your body is supported by your back, or have you just pulled your belly in for some reason? Can you feel the support from your legs that your shoulders can enjoy? Can you feel the support from your skeleton? Sometimes, and as we become more experienced in these arts, the way that our body responds to our intent, because as soon as we start thinking, I want central equilibrium, that becomes an intent. And our bodies become very good at kind of, oh, this is what they want. And doing it. They do that anyway, but in Tai Chi we take that very natural quality and we really cultivate it. So sometimes just the intent to stand and think, oh, I sometimes find myself standing in the shop queue or maybe walking down the road, and I realise I'm kind of like this. And quite often, as soon as I realise I'm that, I don't have. I've got an alternative. I just kind of forgotten about it for the moment. So attentiveness, awareness is always going to be important. And we can use different exercises. One that I've often used with you is this rocking forwards and backwards to help you find that point of balance. And these are useful exercises to practice, so that the exercise itself becomes part of a kind of almost a kind of intuitive intent. I find yourself in the shop just rocking forwards and backwards, going, oh, that's better, kind of thing, almost without realizing it. Now, sinking down, bringing your hands around, you're cradling the ball and pushing up. As soon as we start moving, and that introduces other factors. So, for instance, one of the things that's happening here is that your hips are going further back. In the top position, hips are in line with your ankles, shoulders are in line with your hips. Here, hips are no longer in line with your ankles. So why don't we get pulled backwards? What is it that changes? The main thing is going to be that your pelvis tucks under. So here, if I exaggerate, and this is really exaggerated, so it's going to look really silly actually, but as from here, my pelvis is level. As my hips go back, my pelvis tilts, and then what happens is it naturally makes the adjustment to tilt back. As I say, that is very exaggerated. These movements are very, very subtle, and so just be aware you're not trying to make your pelvis do this. This is a natural response in our pelvis. What we might notice is if, say, you're pulling your belly in, if I do that and I deliberately pull my belly in, I think, oh yeah, the pelvis will tuck up. It won't, because it's going to lock the pelvis into place. So particularly tightness around this area here is going to make that movement in the pelvis more difficult. And then wild goose. So remember, in the chair, when we did things like scooping the sea and grasping the tiger's ears, it was the tilting of the pelvis that put our head forwards and the dropping back of our hips that brought us back to the upright position. So if you're pulling your belly in, or if you're tight in your lower back, that's your habitual way of posture, which is very common. Change now to part in the clouds. Then actually, it's going to make you less stable in your daily life, because we want our pelvis to have the freedom to make those adjustments when we kind of like walk up a slope or step up on a curb or go up our stairs or even step over the threshold of a door. So we let our weight sink, just let your hands come down and rest now. Our center of gravity sinks, less need for that tightness in the center part of our body, because there's simply less weight there. And we practice this, and we learn, for instance, not to pull our belly in. We perhaps notice that in standing, this is happening. Again, this is a very common habit. And what this does is it really puts a lot of pressure here in exactly the area that I'm talking about we want to release, and so on and so forth. So we start to go through a process of analysis of the posture, really coming out of our own observations of what's going on and comparing that to the ideal. The ideal is Sun, central equilibrium, Zhongding, and so on and so forth. And when we don't have those qualities, then we can start to say, well, okay, why don't we have those qualities? Where is it? Where are they being prevented? Now, 1 foot forwards and transfer your weight. You want to play with this idea a little bit. You wouldn't be able to do it now, I shouldn't think. My floor is level. But when I go out and practice outside, the floor that I practice on has all sorts of bumps and hollows in. And it's quite interesting if you can find a way of doing this. Obviously, you've got to be safe doing this. Don't take any chances. But if there's a bump in your lawn, put 1 foot on that bump and just feel what's happening. You go forward. How can you allow the body to account for that? Raising your toes in your heel, this could be quite challenging as well. But I would emphasize allowing the body to do it, not forcing the body to do it. If it's an unusual exercise for you, then you may need time for conditioning, because these are very subtle movements and they require certain sort of levels of ability, I suppose you would call it, in managing what are called sort of like micro movements or mini movements for the muscles and the nerves and so on and so forth. And if you've lost some of that ability, it'll take you a little while to get it back. But that is possible. You have to be patient with this. And then stepping in. And again, we will come out of central equilibrium on the other side. I sometimes think of central equilibrium and our roots and our alignment and everything that's involved in in the feeling as being like the mooring post that a boat is tethered to when it's in a river or on the sea. And it doesn't stay in one place. It kind of drifts away a little bit, but it gets drawn back. And I think this sense of being drawn back is what's really useful, because there will be things that draw you out of that state, both physically and mentally. And then raising your toes and your heel. And they're not necessarily bad things. It could be you've got to make some arrangements because you've got visitors coming at the weekend. It's, oh, I'm going to do that. Well, that will occupy your thought. That will draw you out of that sense of calmness. It's not a bad thing. It's, but we don't want to be like that all the time, I suppose you'd say. And then stepping through. I'm always reminded when I talk about this of T.T. Liang's statement that he lost balance all the time, but got it back all the time. And after all, would we really have a life if we were never in a position where we sort of lost that quality? And then stepping through. And then going back. When I used to do stress management stuff, I used to say to people, if you don't want to feel stressed, never go on holiday, never move house, never change jobs, never have children. So be really careful about your friends and so on and so forth. That doesn't mean that we have to put up with bad housing or a lousy work situation. By the way, it's just that there are different types of stress, aren't there? And then so there are different types of things. Some things are just inherently they're quite difficult, but they're worth doing. Other things, they're things that you might want to change. And I think in a way, what I'm talking about is an outgrowth of that, because it's from that position of central equilibrium, from that clarity, we can see, yeah, it's going to be a bit of a hassle to make that trip, but it's worth it because I see my friends. But other things, it's like, no, I don't see why I should go down to London to do my Christmas shopping when there's a train strike on, sort of thing. So, think your way back and fisherman cast the net. Just a few rounds of this to re-establish the connections, feet, the hips, the shoulders, the hands. Because then we're going to go into the somewhat more difficult wind blows the willows. But actually, when we can see what's going on in the body, we see that the transition between those two movements is really only one step, which is the turning of the center. Can you still feel your hips thinking about? Good. And then on the other side, fisherman cast the net. and then return. Then we're going to go into dragonfly skim with the water. Raise your heel, bring your foot in as you start to turn. Do you still have that quality of central equilibrium? No? Give yourself a moment to find it again. Release the hips. Step forwards. Yeah. Take that little rest here. As you feel yourself more and more naturally going into this posture, then maybe the legs coming up. But remember, sometimes you'll see me do this. I'll get there, and I go to lift my leg. Oh, no, I'll put my foot down, and then I'll lift it up again because I didn't quite have it. I'm not prepared to fall over. I will most commonly lose that, not entirely, but I most commonly do that when I'm teaching, because some of my attention at this point in this undeniably tricky exercise is on people I'm teaching, of course. But this is an exercise that really does work best with full focus. And then bring yourself back. So go back to your chair. The point of that exercise and the things I've been saying is not really from a practical point of view to say this is how you stand on one leg, because actually we rarely have to stand on one leg. So if I'm just walking around for a few moments, I'm standing on one leg, but I don't necessarily need at that point to bring my full attention to it, which is just as well, because sometimes we're walking down the road with a friend, or we're looking in the shops, or whatever. So expect a few wobbles, and in a way, with a movement like we've just done, dragonfly skims the water. There's one sense in which sometimes I kind of push it a little bit. There's other things that I can add in. Sometimes I'll do something like, probably won't be able to do it now, here, and then I'll do a little kick out and back, and there you go. There was that little wobble. Not because I want to be able to do that for any kind of practical reason, but because it's just a way of kind of moving my ability forwards a little bit. The really important outcomes of these things are in our daily lives. And without that sense that there's something moving from the practice to help us in our daily lives, then you have to question, what's the point of the practice? I'm not saying there isn't, that we don't need to practice, and it isn't good to have this space, by the way. Of course it is, and it's very important. But it's like a musician playing the scales on their instrument, and the whatever they do, it's so that when they get out on stage, they can then play the tune, sort of thing. So following up on this idea of returning, embrace time and return to the mountain. Expanding and then contracting. I love this exercise for the way that it doesn't judge. It doesn't say we shouldn't be expanding or reach out. It fully acknowledges that that's a part of it, and that in the process of doing that, we kind of lose touch a little bit with the mountain. One of the sort of I want to say translation, one of the interpretations of the name Embracing Tiger is that the tiger represents everyday life in all its kind of ups and downs and turmoils and whatever. And actually, if you think about the name, the tiger's actually embraced. There isn't a kind of instruction here that we somehow reject it, but that we can come back to the mountain. And rest. Fantastic. Thank you as always, everybody. Thank you for joining in.